Hi folks, as usual I'm just going to give it a minute or two for people to join the stream. Takes a few minutes for everyone to get connected. How's it going, Mike? You alright, mate? Hope you're well. Just waiting for a few more people to log on and then we'll crack on with this one. This is something I know quite a few people are waiting to see, so hopefully this will be of use to some people. So let's give it a sec for some people to log on. I hope you're all well. I don't actually get live updates on here, so I'm not actually sure who's connected and who's not. So I'm just going to give it a few minutes before I start, because I don't want it to start rambling on and nobody's there. It just looks stupid. Right. Right. Just checking that I ain't got too much lens flare. No, I can read that okay. What else have we got? Let's move this over a touch. Set this up while waiting for people to connect. I'll give it a minute. I can see a few of you starting to connect now, so just bear with me, guys. Just waiting for a few more people to connect, and then I will start talking about what we're doing today. You're not going to see my face today, I'm afraid. You haven't got that pleasure. I look like I've been run over by a truck, and to be honest, I just don't feel like appearing on camera today, so just bear with me. How's it going? A couple of new names appearing here on the chat. Just give it a couple of minutes if you guys want to stick around. Hopefully the signal's strong enough that we shouldn't disconnect anyway. And I'll show you how to modify your PlayStation Classic Mini if you've got one. You can see mine just hovering around there. Well, I say mine, not actually mine, it's a friend's, but yeah, as usual, I get past these things to kind of dummy run these things, give them a try and see what I can do with them. And I never mess with consoles like this unless, you know, unless there's something cool can be done with them. Straight out the box, I'm not, well, they're not bad buys, but you know, personally I think that once they get cracked, it really opens these systems up to doing something cool. So, right, there's a few of you logging on now, so I might as well start talking. For anybody who's missed anything, just replay this back, you know the drill by now. I might sound like I'm repeating myself a few times. That's for the benefit of people just joining the stream. So, anyway, welcome guys, welcome to another YamYam Retro Gaming stream. By now you know that obviously I'm a big fan of doing modifications to classic retro systems, to do modifications to newer systems, and a lot of you will have seen my videos on modifying the NES Classic and the SNES Mini Classic as well. And then obviously at Christmas Sony did us a solid, which well wasn't fully appreciated, but you know, I quite enjoy it, and they delivered us this, which is the PlayStation Classic to its official title, but otherwise known as the PS Mini to a lot of people. So the system itself isn't bad at all, I don't think. It's come under fire a little bit in reviews from the general population and through gaming press, because they have cut a few corners and it has led to a less than satisfactory experience. I had my reservations myself when I heard that they were doing this, because they didn't announce it until right before it came out. The game lineup seemed pretty solid from what I could see, but there were a few obvious glaring omissions, things like Crash Bandicoot and the original Ridge Racers, which, being Sony, there should be no excuse as to why that didn't happen. And to be honest, because I've been messing with ARM-based systems and you know mobile platform hardware for a while for doing retro gaming, I had my reservations as to whether they would deliver a product that was strong enough to emulate the system. Over the years I've been kind of the master of cramming, and in our arcade machines I've managed to squeeze a lot of performance out of very low spec PCs to be able to emulate, you know, systems that really they shouldn't be able to do. And so, you know, I started to work with portable long before this Raspberry Pi bullshit came about, which, by the way, I'm going to say is still an underpowered mess and not what it was promised to be when it was first talked about it way back in, 2010, 11. So I'm not happy with it. There's better ARM-based systems out there, and I've been using Android mini PCs for many years in personal projects. So, moving into systems like this, which, would generally be like Linux-based or using some other kind of architecture, it's good to experiment with because they tend to be fairly lightweight and you can squeeze a lot out of them. But if you don't do it in the right way, you're going to have a crap experience. The emulation on these things is not perfect. That is the biggest complaint that people have. And when people ask why people modify these systems, with the NES Mini and the SNES Mini, everyone was pretty happy with the experience you had. You had a choice of how things displayed. You had a decent selection of games. You had a nice GUI front end. There was a lot of potential. You had good controllers and things like that. The only thing we wanted was a more expanded library, and obviously somebody soon found out a way to do that. It wasn't out very long at all before it was cracked. It was going to be the same situation with this because the kind of architecture it's on is pretty open. Everybody knows what to do with them, and rather than being like proprietary systems they're using, the original manufacturers are now kind of leaning on the emulation community and the people who've been hacking their software for years to now create these things for them because it takes all the hard work out. But the problem is if they don't manufacture them right and use the right spec, you're going to end up with subpar performance. Now, when you move, you've got to remember the 5th generation of consoles, the PlayStation, was the first truly, move towards PCs that consoles did. It was the first move into 3D polygonal graphics. It was the first time that home console hardware actually superseded what was happening in the arcades. And obviously the big leap in tech means that the leap in complexity for systems to emulate them was going to be more difficult. Encryption was going to be more difficult. The power that it would need to process the graphics and the CD sound and everything was going to need to go up. Because when people talked about the N64 classic pod probably happening, this kind of came out of left field. And the biggest problem it was going to have really was going to be emulating the 3D graphics and also to fit the massive amounts of data that you'd find on CD storage onto a device and have it perform well. And Sony made some slightly wrong choices when it came to the actual hardware in this. However, it's not poorly built. It's very well, it's very accurate in terms of the way it's been proportioned, just like the NES Mini and the Classic and the SNES Mini. The controllers are good and very responsive. It's a shame they didn't have either the analog pads or the DualShock pads, but you've got to remember that those didn't come till much later in the console's lifespan, and it probably drove what choice of games they put on there. There's also a few other things when you start looking at the technicalities. I believe the choice of games that was put on there by default was partly done because of problems with emulation quality, and I'll talk more about that as we go into this. So when people ask why do you do things like this, it's because I believe the only true way to kind of get the most out of these systems is to hack them properly and to get the best out of them. Now, just before Christmas, they only came out start of December. Just before Christmas, a modding community got together and the system came out, and very soon after it was cracked. It was cracked using a tool called BleemSync, and I believe it's based on the system that Bleem, which was an emulation system from back in the day, that they used to be able to run PlayStation games on a PC and PlayStation games on the Dreamcast. And I think they've used similar methods or something like that to be able to create this, which is why it gets the name BleemSync anyway. But that's what the modification is called. And like a lot of systems today, the point of this hack is it will modify the system to be able to use a different core emulator, and it will also allow you to add more games. It'll allow you to add more systems so you can emulate other platforms if you want to. Being capable of being able to do the the PlayStation games, you can expect it to be powerful enough to do all your 8-bit systems, the handhelds, the 16-bit consoles. It's just a question of how much storage space you want to add to it. With the NES Mini and the SNES Mini, there was plenty of room to add games to it, and adding expansion was kind of convoluted because the only USB port you've got is the one that powers it. So you needed a kind of pass-through USB hub in order to add expanded storage, which is a bit of a pain in the arse. With this, you do have to add external storage, but the good news is you've got USB ports available. You do have to kind of work around it slightly to be able to play 2-player, but it does mean that you can choose the amount of size that you want, and I believe it will, in theory, it will support external USB storage up to massive sizes. So you're talking your 128 gigabyte, 256 gigabyte USB flash drives, which you can get now. You can also use powered USB hard drives and things like that. I don't really like to go down that road myself because it's too much extra kit to have around with you. I personally like to keep it as compact as I can, and so I've gone with an option which I'll show you here in a minute, which makes a lot more sense to me if you want to keep everything as compact as the other minis. So what we're basically going to be doing in order to modify the console, I'm going to say now that I am actually not going to be demonstrating some of the steps live. I'll talk you through them, but I won't show them live, and that's because this system has already been modified. Now, because the hack is in a pretty early stage, I've been holding off doing this video because they've made some massive changes in the month or so that the mod has been around. So I originally modified this system with the 0.43 hack. It's now been modified with the latest public early beta of the 1.0 hack of BleemSync. It's still not perfect, it's still not totally stable, but it's a massive step up from the early ones in some ways, and I don't want to mess around too much because I don't want to do anything to the system. I've got it stable, works well. As with anything, when you modify it, you always run the risk that you could do something to it. It was the same with the NES and SNES Mini. When I first did mine, I had to kind of go backwards and forwards a few times to get the proper result. It was actually a lot simpler with this once I understood the instructions. Thanks, Darren, I appreciate that, mate. It's good coming from you. Obviously, you're into your retro in a very big way, as everyone knows. So, yeah, I know like my video recording skills aren't the best. I know I'm literally relying on my iPhone video, but I like to give it your gorilla style because I need you to see what I'm looking at my desk, exactly how I'm doing it as I'm looking at it right now. So that's why I film them the way I do, and that's why I'll give it to you in real time. So, as far as this hack goes, it's fairly lightweight compared to other hacks. I believe when you're doing the SNES and the NES classic hacks, you're actually modifying massive amounts of the firmware and the kernel that's built into those, and you do run the risk of bricking those quite badly. From what I understand, this modification doesn't actually put a lot onto the system. In fact, if you remove the USB stick that you're using or USB storage that contains all your games and everything, the system will behave just like normal, so you wouldn't even know it was modified to the untrained eye. I'm sure a technician who knows the code will be able to pick apart the differences, but the actual payload that it injects into your system is very small, and all it does is it does three things. It enables reading of a USB device through the front ports. It unlocks the rear USB. Anybody who's used the SNES and NES Classic and then have used this will know that out of the box, the PlayStation Mini won't allow you to power the system from a TV, a PC, or any other kind of device. There's actually a lock in place built into the firmware which restricts that. Now, I can understand why they've done that. Sony being Sony, they've done it because they know that if you're able to plug this into a PC, it makes it very easy to hack, and they've got to be seen to be doing some kind of restriction to stop it being hacked. It keeps their the people they're licensing games from happy. It keeps people who are working with them on the projects happy. but they know it's going to be cracked and they know it's going to be easy to break. So it's only very rudimentary, and they've cracked that now. So with this hack, you'll be able to power your PlayStation Classic Mini from your TV's USB port. Very handy if, like me, your wall sockets are already crammed, and you know you've got to scroll around to find the right plug for your USB charger and things like that. It's handy to plug it straight into a TV. It's also very handy when I do minor events, I'll point out, because it means if I haven't got an extra socket handy in the big daisy chains we create, it means I can plug the power and the video straight into a lot of the TVs which have got USB sockets now. So very handy indeed. So yeah, it injects that payload and it allows you to read from USB, and it allows you to power the system from the PC. For the latest version of the hack, that is very important. The latest version of the hack, the early versions basically meant that you had to do a lot of stuff offline. So you would take your USB memory stick, you would plug it into your PC, and there was a lot that you would do manually in terms of adding your games. The latest version of the hack makes it a little bit more convoluted, unfortunately, but it does create a slightly more stable system, and the latest hack does a lot more things. So I'm going to be covering the latest hack, and I'm going to be doing this video as though you're not upgrading from your old one to the new one, that you're doing it from fresh. The reason I'm doing that is because I actually did follow their instructions to upgrade from the earlier hack to the newer hack, and it caused some problems. If you have already hacked your PlayStation Mini and you're watching this just for reference, I'd recommend you delete your memory card, you start from fresh, and you follow the instructions for doing the hack from fresh, because you'll get a much better final result. It'll be a lot more stable, and you'll be a lot happier with what's the way it's all working. So what you're going to need in order to do this hack, you're going to need obviously your PlayStation Mini. You're going to need one controller plugged into to port 1. You're going to need your USB cable out and not attached to a wall socket. What you're going to need to do, you're going to need to do is to have your plug that goes into the back of your PlayStation, the power lead that goes into the back of the PlayStation Mini. You're going to need that handy here, because you're not going to be plugging that into the wall. You're going to be plugging it straight into your PC in a minute. So, right. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get yourself a USB stick. Right. There's many ways you can do this. You can use a powered hard drive. You can use either SD cards or USB flash drives. My personal preference is to use a USB flash drive. Now, I personally am using, this is actually an SD card, sorry, a micro SD card, that's in a super low profile USB adapter for it. It's a USB 3.0, I think, adapter, but at the end of the day, the power that it consumes is only going to be determined by the speed of the SD card. Now, what I've got in here is this is a 32 gigabyte SD card, which is plenty for the games that I want to play. And because it's super low profile, it's not going to protrude too much out of the system. It makes it beautiful and compact. And I got this from where I get all my other memory cards and things from, mymemory.co.uk. They do some brilliant stuff. And most of the USB sticks you've seen me use in other videos have come from there. This little low profile adapter there, you can just see the SD card. It pretty much goes into the USB plug section. It's so slimline. I really like that. You can use USB sticks, but I'm going to tell you now, if it's an unpowered drive, so if you're using a flash drive as I am, you're going to want to try and hunt for a USB 2 flash drive. Now, I know that will tend to restrict the size that you can have for a USB flash drive. That's because USB 2.0 drives only tended to go up to about 64 gigabytes, probably 32 gigabyte mostly, some 64 gigabyte. USB 3 is a bit hit or miss. USB 2 is a bit hit or miss. The reason being, Sony, for some reason, have limited the amount of current that can go through the front USB ports on the PlayStation Classic Mini. This is where the problem comes, in that you're going to need powered drives if you're going to try and plug something else in. USB 3 draws a lot more current in order to operate at the higher speeds that a PC needs. The problem with that is the more poorly designed ones won't have any kind of throttling ability that will keep the current low in what it's consuming when it's being used. If the current draw exceeds 100 milliamps, your USB drive won't work. There's also certain capacities that won't work anyway. And whatever happens, at the moment you're going to need to format your USB drive in FAT32, which, as people who know file systems know, is a bit trickier when you're going into the larger memory sticks and things like that. This integral 64GB 3.0 stick doesn't work, I can tell you for a fact. I'm showing you as an example because it's very hard to get reference on things like that. This will not work. This is the kind of thing I get from mymemory.com. This is a 128GB USB 2, I believe, which is very strange. This is actually going to be used for another project. I want to try it on this to see if it works, but I'm not going to use it today. All I can really show you as an example, because I don't want to delete my main memory card, is I'm going to be using this. This is a USB SD card adapter for standard size SD cards and micro SD cards. And all I've got available at the moment is this tiny 2GB card. The good news is it's great for showing you this for the demo, and I can guarantee that it works, so I've done it before. Yeah, Dave, only 100 milliamps. And it does say USB 3.0 on there. However, I've tested this several times, and with like older SD cards, smaller SD cards, the lower the SD card goes, the lower the current draw, and this works perfectly with my PlayStation Classic. So I'm going to be showing you with this today. It will draw the lower current. I believe there were certain operating ranges for USB sticks, and I think the spec for USB 2, the guide ranges were something like 50 milliamps up to 650 milliamps. Now, nothing tends to draw that higher current, only the highest performance ones. But with USB 3, I think the guided milliamp draw was between 250 and 1.5 amps. And the problem is with that is obviously that's far too high for the PlayStation Mini to use. They're going to try and lift that in the next firmware, the next hack version that they do, but for now you're stuck with it. You can, once you've done this new crack, change your file system, and you won't have to use FAT32, and they actually recommend that you switch the file system to exFAT or NTFS once you've actually done the crack, because it's a lot more stable and it reads a lot faster. But they haven't worked out a way yet to be able to do the initial hack without having a FAT32 formatted SD card that draws a low current. In the next hack they'll lift that, but you'll probably still need to be able to find one of these to do the initial hack yourself. So once you've got yourself your USB thing ready, I mean this is a 2GB card, we're going to plug that into the PC. Just going to do that there, just off camera. Just give that a second to read up. And then we will minimise that. There we go, it's opened up right. Now you can see I've already pre-formatted this because I was doing some testing myself. I'm going to try and eliminate some of the glare from the light, but yeah, 1 second, sorry folks. There we go. Right, so just 2 seconds. Right, okay. So yeah, so what we've done is we've got our SD card there, our USB flash drive, and what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to format that drive. You're going to want to right click on it, you're going to want to format it. If it's under 32GB, you should be able to format it in FAT32 using Windows. If it's larger than 32GB, you're going to want to use something like GUI format or FAT32 formatter. They're free programs you can download, and you're going to want to use those programs and format it in FAT32. I can do it through Windows because it's a very small drive. So we're going to hit format, and then you can see you've got the format window here. And on that, you can see 2 GB is the size. File system default is FAT32. I leave the allocation unit size as 4096 bytes, which is what it tends to default as. Now this is very important. You need to change the volume label to read Sony in capital letters. It can't be anything else. If it's anything other than Sony, it won't work. I think they discovered when they actually did the hack that in order to do it, there was some kind of diagnostic kind of method on there that was designed for when they service these things. And obviously it's been designed that in some way it will recognise some kind of USB device plugged in with Sony on there for some reason, probably for the engineers' tools. So, but anyway, you have to have it formatted as Sony, else it won't work. So we're just going to jump on that. We're going to hit go. Format's finished. So we'll close that. I'll close this defrag. I was just doing that because my computer's running like crap beforehand. And we'll call up, there should be 2 folders open, there's only 1 folder open. Right, so once you've done that, you're going to want to go to this site. This is modmyclassic.com/BleemSync. If you do a search on Google for BleemSync, it will come up with this page in the top few results. You might find some Reddit links first. You actually want the Mod My Classic site. All the information you need has been moved to the front page there. Once you do that, if you go down, it gives you a little bit of history on it. It tells you what it does. It tells you what changes have been made in the recent versions, and it tells you how to do it. And it also mentions here that you're going to need certain things in order for this to run. One thing it does mention, it says that in order for your PC to recognise the PlayStation Mini, it's going to need this, the generic RDNIS driver. It should auto-install for Windows and Linux. You can get a Mac version for it. If you've used the Hack-Chi tool to do your NES Classic Mini or your SNES Classic Mini in the past, it will have installed this driver on your system anyway as part of the installation process. If you're in doubt about it, it does give you a link to be able to manually download it and grab it here. Right. So, and you scroll down, and then it goes on to the instructions. Now the instructions here, you're going to want to follow, if you're doing this back at home now, you're going to want to follow the top option, which is how to install from fresh. You'll see there's a few options there. You want to expand the section that says how to install from fresh. And then what you want to do is just scroll down a little bit further, and you'll see there's a where to download. If you hit that and click on that link there, which is the BleemSync 1.00 public beta, when you download it, you'll be given this file, which is BleemSync 1.0 zip. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to right click on that. Obviously it's a zipped file, it's a compressed file, and then using 7-zip or the inbuilt zip archiver, just extract those files, and it'll extract those files to your desktop. Give it a second to finish up. There we go. You can probably see some of the, if you actually play this back, you can probably see some of the things that it's injected into the payload, things like the RetroArch cores for NES and SNES and everything like that. It installs all this as by default when you do it. Once you're done, you don't need the zip file. What you're going to need to do is highlight BleemSync and the very strangely named folder there, which contains all the hack data. You're going to want to copy that over, and you're going to want to drop that onto your freshly formatted SD card, your flash drive, whatever it is you're using. So that's what I'm doing there. I'm just copying that into the root. That'll just take a minute or two. give that a chance to do. And like I say, the next step I'm not actually going to be going to be doing with this SD card, purely because I'm not sure what state this PlayStation Classic Mini is in, because I've already done a few hacks on it and they aren't totally clear about what changes are being made. I don't want to end up undoing what I've done on it so far, so I'm going to kind of simulate going through the motion for these next few steps. But the instructions are all here on this website, and I'm going to be talking you through them exactly as I did them anyway. So we've done number one, which is download the zip package. We've formatted the USB drive, USB 2.0 preferable, to FAT32 and called it Sony. We extracted the zip package here. Right, the console is unplugged from power, HDMI and any powered USB hub. It is plugged into HDMI on the telly, but there's no power going to the TV at the moment, so that's fine, and we've got it unplugged here. So once we've got this copied over, see where we're up to, 77% complete. Give that a second. What we're going to do is we're going to take this USB drive out of the computer and we're going to move over to the PlayStation Classic. So just give this a second. 83, 84. Yeah, anybody thinking of getting one of these PlayStation Classic Minis now? If you haven't got one yet, I don't know if I can recommend them as they are out of the box, but when they're modified, they are handy little things to have. Much like using an EverDrive with a modern console, much like you know, modifying the classic minis that have been out so far. You're getting all of your library in one place, potentially. You've got virtual memory cards, so you can save all your games. And when you do this modification, you can actually use game shark codes and add cheats to your games and things like that, and copy files between them and make modifications. You can add games that were never released. You know, I'm going to be putting Resident Evil 1.5 on mine. I've already got Thrill Kill on there, which obviously was an unreleased game, and that works just fine. So we've done that, so we're going to safely remove that drive, and make sure you do that, by the way, guys. Eject USB storage. And then what you would do is you would move your USB stick over to your PlayStation Mini. You plug that into port 2 on the console there, like that, and you must do that before it's powered up. And then we go back to the instructions. There we go, and hook the console power back up. Right, so we would need to plug this into the wall to do this step. Sorry, you can't actually plug it into the PC just yet. So once you've done all that, you take your USB connection from the end for your power, plug that into the wall, and what will actually happen is the USB stick that's there will deliver a payload onto your PlayStation Classic Mini. You will get a Bleem Sync prompt come up on the screen, and it tells you in the instructions on screen here, the light on the PlayStation Classic will change from a red to a green and flash a few times, and then it will go orange once it's delivered the payload. Once you've done that, you can power it all down, and then you want to unplug it from the wall, and this is when we move over back to our PC, because at that point it's injected the payload, it's made it so that it can plug into a PC for its power, and you're going to need to plug it into a PC for power in order to add your games and make all the other changes. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug back in my USB stick, because obviously the modification's already been done. And I'm going to pretend as though obviously this is a fresh install. So your USB stick is in, it's fully unplugged from the wall, and now what we're going to do is we're going to take USB power, we're going to plug that into our laptop here, and in a second you will see the power come through to the PlayStation Classic. There we go, and you can tell that mine's been hacked because the LED standby light is orange and not red. So once that's done, you hit the power button on the console, I believe. 2 seconds. So I did this about 2 weeks ago. Right, that's it, yeah, that's fine. Right, so we've now got our system plugged in. We're going to turn on our TV. We're going to turn on our console. And you can see that the LED there has gone to green. It's going to load up, and you can see that it skipped the Sony load screen because I've set it up that way. And in just a second, you'll see it loads to our new boot menu. Now, our new boot menu replaces the standard PlayStation splash screen for now. And you can see we've got a choice between RetroArch and BleemSync. Now, once we get to that point, the system is ready to start installing your games. So, assuming it's plugged into your laptop as it is now, you can see obviously that is now plugged into my laptop and drawing power straight from my laptop, which it couldn't do before. From this site, there's a link which you can click. I'm just trying to find it now. Oh, there you go, how to use BleemSync once installed. If you click on that, and I've already done the first few steps, and then what you'll do is there's a link here which takes you to the BleemSync user interface that's on your computer. Your PC will need to be connected to the internet for this. It has to do it online. It's not a great way of doing it, I'll be honest. I prefer to do things manually myself. But if you're kind of a tech spaz or you want it the simplest way, I guess this is the way they're angling towards, and it you know, it's pretty efficient, I suppose. You hit either the first link or the second link here, and what will happen is at the top of the screen, you'll see a new window opens, and as long as your PlayStation's connected properly and you've given it about 30 seconds to properly connect to your PC, it will bring up this, which is the BleemSync user interface. So if you hadn't connected properly, what you would get is you would get that screen which says this site can't be reached. I did that earlier before the PlayStation was plugged in. It doesn't connect to anything if your PlayStation's not plugged in. If your PlayStation's plugged in, when you click those links, it will take you to this. Now you've got a few options from here. The first thing you've got is if you click on PlayStation Classic on the left, you'll see there's a couple of things. There's system preferences, and there's BleemSync preferences. I believe for now, system preferences is for like certain admin features that you can't really mess with. I think they'll introduce slight changes to that when they release the later hacks. But for now, you don't want to touch that. BleemSync preferences you might do. Now by default, some of these things will be checked and some won't. You can see some options here, like use runtime logs. If true, then clear down logs on each boot up. You want to leave those checked. I think they're checked by default. At the end of the day, it's all about error checking and things like that. I'd rather leave those active for now until I'm sure that the hack is stable, until they're sure that it's fully working. But there are a few other things here you can alter if you want to. This is an option that I've enabled on mine, and this is something I wanted out of the last hack and it wasn't possible. It says, if true, dynamically links the eMMC games on top of the USB games. What that means is, whereas with the hack before, you had to put all the games you wanted on a USB stick, and it would only either recognise what the built-in games or what's on your memory card. If you're using a limited size memory card, it meant you had to duplicate putting the games that were built in on the system on the card if you wanted them there. You don't really want to do that, even though they're not the best. People have said like it's not the definitive version, they're using PAL versions and things like that. That doesn't really matter anymore. What this actually does is it's installing a better version of the PCSX emulator. So, and if you check this option here, you'll see it says, if true, then RetroArch is the emulator for the stock UI. If you tick that one, what that will actually do is it will take the proper RetroArch PCSX emulator that's used for most builds of RetroArch and other systems, and it will use that to run the stock games, and it will use the stock user interface, you know, the wheel that goes round, and you can use that same menu system. You can use all your original games and your new games, but it will use the more optimised and better programmed PCSX version that's in RetroArch. And I can tell you now that the speed difference, the quality difference, and the amount of options you've got available is massive. So I would recommend that you do that, because that you can still have the standard experience, but it means that you can actually use your upgraded games and things like that, and benefit from the enhanced speed and everything. And like I say, I've had it so it will add the built-in games to the USB games. That gives me more games available without needing to take up space on my USB stick. I prefer it that way. It's up to you what you want to do. And if true, auto alphabeticalise eMMC and USB games. Yes, I'd also check that as well. It will sort them. At the moment, there's no way to actually manually sort, even though it says this will alphabeticalise them. You can't manually sort them. On the earlier hack, you could manually sort your games by changing the number of the folder that they're in on the USB stick. In this hack, because it's brand new, there's no way to manually change that. So if you leave it by alphabeticalise, it will sort of put them in order. If you think about games where the sequels weren't like sequentially numbered, you can understand why that would be a problem. So for instance, the Ridge Racer series, you didn't have Ridge Racer 1, 2, 3 and 4. You had Ridge Racer Revolution. Now those will appear next to each other in the menu, but then 3 was called Rage Racer. Now that puts that a lot earlier in the wheel, which it kind of messes my LCD a bit, you know what I mean? And then Ridge Racer 4 goes by its American name, even though it's the UK ROM that's on here, I believe, which is R4 Ridge Racer 4. So it puts that at the very start of the R's, which is a bit of a pain in the arse. When they come out with the new hack, I think they will change that. They've said they will change it, and they will enable things like manual sorting and things like that. There's a few other options here. Toggle Bleem Sync splash screen. That is what you're seeing on the TV right now, the Bleem Sync splash screen. I recommend having it active purely because once you disable it, to be able to reconnect it to your PC and get this up, you have to do it with the HDMI unplugged. It's a little bit fiddly, so I'd say for now leave this active. They'll probably fix that in the second one, where you'll be able to hold a button and just be able to select that on boot. But for now, I'd say leave that active, and you can choose from here whether to launch RetroArch outright or whether you want to launch the standard UI and use your games that way. It's just one more step in the chain. Leave it active, at least then you can go back and add games as you see fit. And you can see there a couple of other options. Toggle Bleem Sync splash screen. You can actually add files to the system manually, like I think there's a certain size bitmap, and you can have custom backgrounds for the screen. You can have it to boot directly to the stock UI or boot to RetroArch. I've got it set as boot directly to the boot menu selector. That's what we've got there. And I've disabled the health warning, because even though, you know, some people kind of like the authenticity of seeing the Sony logos, it does slow up the boot process. The boot there was pretty quick, and I'm quite happy with that. And if you go a bit further down, there's a couple of other little options there. Override the current theme's music folder. By default, this menu here will have music. I found the music rather annoying. You can put custom music on there, but to be honest, when it comes to a user interface, you know, we run these events, the last thing you want, especially if you're a trader sat next to this, or you're a member of staff who's by it all day, you don't want a tune playing in your ear all day. So that's why I've disabled music in that full stop. You can also then have a random theme for the background, and you can have the music loop if you want to. I've left all those unchecked because I'm happy with the standard layout, to be honest. And then we get to the meat of this, and that is the games. So if I click on games and go to manage, you'll see here it's got listed all the games that I've got installed on this stick, on the USB stick. It won't list the default games, so you have to bear in mind and remember that you've got those on there. And I'm not sure how it fully does the sorting, but what I did when I installed my games was I started with the earliest lettered game, and I sorted them all into order myself. Now, when it comes to adding games, it's quite simple to do. You want to download your games, and what you're going to do is you're going to need your games in a specific format. It will now recognise a couple of different formats, as it tells you on the website, but the formats that it recognises still need to be in a certain structure in order for it to work properly. So if I go to my PS1 folder here, you can see I've got a few different PS1 ISOs at the moment in various formats. We've got a few here like Fear Effect, which are in the correct format. That is, they're a single Q file with a single bin file. That is the ideal file structure you want when copying your games onto your PlayStation Classic. You can do it by by converting to or downloading them in ISO format. However, if you've got certain games which use CD audio for their audio tracks, now there are quite a lot of those on PlayStation. The original two Ridge Racers both use CDDA. I think Tekken 1 and 2 definitely do, and quite a few other important games use CD audio. And it was so you could play that audio in a CD player if you wanted to, or you could swap out a disc and play your own music. If you've got it in ISO format, I don't think the CD audio will work within the emulator. So ideally you want to have your files in Q and bin. If you download your games and they happen to be in a format like this, you'll see here for the Street Fighter collection we've got Q and we've got bin files, but it's actually a separated bin file. So you can see the Q file there, and if we open that Q file in WordPad, you'll see that it does correctly list all of the tracks on here. However, Bleem Sync and RetroArch doesn't like that. It won't like that format. It's fine for burning to disk, but it's no good for this. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to convert this to a single bin file. Now, there is a way of doing that. If you download Daemon Tools is actually a virtual device creator. If you install that onto your system, you can download Daemon Tools Lite for free. And if we open that up, let's give it a second to load. What you can do is you can hit the quick mount button in the bottom, and then what you can do is pick the file that you want to mount on there, which in this case is the Street Fighter collection. So we hit the Q file there. What that will do is it will mount that disk image with all its tracks correctly onto a virtual CD drive. Once you've got it on a virtual CD drive, you'll see if I go into this PC, there'll be a new drive appeared. There we go. BD-ROM drive, Street Fighter collection has appeared now in there. It's not a real drive on my computer, it's a virtual drive, and you can see that that is actually the Street Fighter collection, as though that was a PlayStation disc. Once you've mounted that virtual drive, you want to use another program called Image Burn. Now, if you do a lot of disk copying, or you do a lot of ripping of your own discs for things like your EverDrives, you're probably going to be using this program a lot anyway. So you're going to want to get Image Burn up, and then what you can actually do is you click Create Image File from Disk. Now, what we've done is we've just taken some image files, mounted them onto a virtual disk drive, and that now thinks that the actual disk is in a drive that doesn't exist. So if we click create image file from disk on image burn, and then we select a file, destination for it to go into. So I'll say desktop because I can easily find it then. You can choose what you want to call it there, and ideally you want to call it the correct name as you want it to display. Image burn's brilliant, Dave. It's a fantastic program, and because it's not reading from a physical disk, it will do this very quick. We hit save. Doesn't matter what you set the read speed to, because it's reading from a virtual drive. It will read like that. If you're reading from a proper disk, reading at 4 speed will take about 5 minutes. If you're reading from a virtual drive, well, you'll see in a second just how quick it is. We hit that. You can see how quick it's reading the tracks just here. And then in a second, you'll see this just go, and it should go to 100%. Should. Assuming I've got enough space on my hard drive. Well, what do you know? I think I've got a fault in one of those files. That was a file I downloaded a couple of weeks ago. My apologies for that. But that's how you do it anyway. And what that will have done is I'll cancel the operation. And what that will have done is once you've completed it, that will create a new file. New files on your desktop of just a single queue and a single bin file on your desktop, and then once you've got those files, you're ready to copy them over to using Bleem Sync to your PlayStation Mini. Now you can see I've already got a fair few games done here. You can see we've got Buster Move 2, Buster Move 3, Buster Move 4, and I have got a mix between American versions of games. Where possible, try and get the American versions because they will run a little bit smoother. But if you've got an affinity to certain games, as I have, things like Gran Turismo 2, the American version has a very different soundtrack and different cars to the British version. I've got an affinity to the British version, so I've downloaded the UK version of Gran Turismo 2 because that's what I grew up with and that's what I'm familiar with. So it's a British version of Gran Turismo 2. I think I've got the American version of Gran Turismo 1, no problem with that. But then there's other games as well. I think Buster Move 3 is the British version. The American version was slightly different, and it's called Buster Move 99. And it actually came out around the same time as Buster Move 4 in America. There's other games there where the American versions just aren't the same. Micromaniacs, for example, that was a very British game by a very British publishing house, Codemasters. The American version was sponsored by some fucking kids' TV channel or something, and you end up with splash screens all over it of it being sponsored by this kids' channel, and it's terrible. So I had to get the UK version of that, and I left the American version of Micro Machines just so we got the full speed because I don't think there's any differences there. There's probably a couple more examples there, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. But you can see I've added such games here as like Buster Move. I love the Crash Bandicoot series. Who doesn't love Crash Bandicoot? Discworld, Doom, which is the finest console version of Doom that there is. That does kind of challenge the emulator a little bit, but you do get a good pace on it. It doesn't slow down too much. Gran Turismo runs at good pace. When I was talking earlier about the performance of this system, a lot of people complained about lag, about frame skip and things like that. There's still definitely some holes in the emulator they've chosen, but PCSX is probably the best performing on ARM devices that are slightly lower powered. Even though EPSXE is probably the king of PlayStation emulators when it comes to PC and when it comes to mobile devices, it needs a little bit more grunt to run. It uses plugins and things like that, and it's not open source. It's actually commercial in some places, so they haven't got that on here yet, and I don't think they'll be able to interface it with the built-in user interface if they did, which is kind of a shame because I think you get the best, you get the best PlayStation emulator in that. But I don't know if the hardware on this thing is powerful enough to run it at full speed anyway. So the RetroArch build of PCSX that actually replaces the inbuilt one that Sony put on there will run games a lot better. Some of the inbuilt games had terrible slowdown. Ridge Racer 4 had terrible slowdown. What else had terrible slowdown? I think Tekken 3 had frame drops. Resident Evil was the PAL version. I'm not such a big problem with that because Resident Evil's not a fast-paced game anyway. But there are other examples. And when I did the first hack and you had to use the inbuilt emulator to play some games that I added, some games were unplayable. Some games wouldn't run at all. I couldn't get Resident Evil 3 to run initially. And I've had to use the American version of the game. Now, anyone who knows a Resident Evil knows there are subtle differences between the Japanese, American and UK versions of that game and Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 1 even. So it wasn't ideal. I wanted the British version in, but the version differences aren't massive, so I've not got a big problem with that being the American version of Resident Evil 3. But there are other games that the performance, even with the new emulator that's running on there, that's replaced the stock emulator, I've found some big problems with. One of them are the Ridge Racer games I just mentioned. Ridge Racer and Ridge Racer Evolution, I will show you shortly, both suffer from a weird lag where it will kind of run at like turbo speed, and then every so often when it gets a bit hectic with the draw distance and things like that, you'll get like a momentary lag up and then it will kind of free itself up again. It's not so bad it makes the games unplayable, but it certainly brings a bit of a challenge. It's more noticeable on Ridge Racer, and I actually tried the Ridge Racer High Spec demo. Now the Ridge Racer High Spec demo, for people who don't know, was a special version they did that they distributed with Ridge Racer 4, where they actually got the original Ridge Racer, or like a stripped down version of it with just 2 or 3 cars. They actually got it to run at 60 frames per second on the original PlayStation, with slightly more detail in the polygons and in the shading and things like that. And it's one of the best versions of Ridge Racer you can get, and a lot closer to the arcade speed than the standard Ridge Racer you get on PlayStation. Unfortunately, because of the hacks they use on that, and because it probably taxed the PlayStation to its limits, I put that on here and it ran abysmally. Even with the modified emulator, it ran like absolute crap, and unfortunately I won't be able to play that on here. I am pretty soon getting the PSIO device though for the original PlayStation, which allows you to run your ISOs from a flash device on the back of your PlayStation. That in theory should run that game at full speed because you're using original hardware. No problem, Chris. Just watch this back, mate, and you'll get the information. If you've got one of these, you'll get all the information you need to do the modification yourself. But we're just at the point in a minute where I'm going to demonstrate what this looks like when you get into it anyway. So once you've got your games anyway, you go to the game manager here. Go to games, and you go to manage. It'll come here by default. Then what you do is you hit choose files. You hit choose files, and then you go to wherever your ROM down location was, which on here is ROMs PS1. And then what you do is you'd select the Q file and the bin file like that, and click open. At that point, what it will do is it will automatically download a cover artwork for your game. Now you're going to want to let it do that. Sometimes, because what it does, it will actually pull that information from the internet and try and download the correct image for the ROM that you're using. So whether it be American, Japanese or British, it will download the correct cover for it if you can find it on the database. However, sometimes that image quality might be a bit poor. I found with the Gran Turismo, the image quality for Gran Turismo 2 especially was dreadful. Once you've allowed it to do it manually, what you can actually do is you can unplug your USB drive afterwards, and you can then download your own image file. And as long as it's in the right resolution, as you saw there, I think it was 256 by 256 pixels. As long as you've got it in the right resolution there, you can drag and drop that into the correct folder on the USB drive, and it will replace it with the better quality one. I've done that for a couple of the games, especially American games, because when I got down to Wipeout and Discworld, Wipeout, the American version, actually uses a horrible long box version, which we didn't get over here, like a tall box, and when it shows it on screen, it will show it, it won't be able to show it large, it will show it compressed, and it looks like absolute crap. So to keep it uniform, I managed to find a modified standard size version that someone had done, and I've replaced the Wipeout XL, which is Wipeout 2049. I've replaced that with this cover, which is much more akin to the British style, but you can see it's still got the American logo and vertical PlayStation logo at the side there, obviously with all ours in the UK, PlayStation's at the bottom. I've done that just for uniformity. Like I say, it messes with my OCD. And then underneath, once you've added your game, underneath you'll see categories which say name and sort name. Now I found out it doesn't matter what you put sort name as, it will affect the way, the order in which they appear on this list if you change the sort name, but at the moment it won't affect the way it displays in the wheel on the actual console. So I wouldn't bother altering that just yet. I think in the next version, when they allow you to do manual sorting, I think changing the sort name will allow you to determine the exact order your game's appearing on here, and it will reflect that on the system. That will be a nice addition, because what I tried to do was, with the Ridge Racers, like I discussed, I tried to change the names to names that would make sure that it sorts it automatically with the R4 that's on there. So by default, the Ridge Racer 4 that's on the PlayStation Classic Mini built in sorts itself as R4. So what I did is I took Ridge Racer Revolution and Rage Racer, and I named them, for the sake of sorting, as R1, R2 and R3 respectively, but then kept the standard name as obviously Ridge Racer Revolution. I think once they bring out the next version, that will be how you will sort your games out to be in the correct order and display in the correct order when you're actually playing the system on your TV. But for now, if you just want to change the name to display correctly on screen, you just want to change this top one, which is name. You can manually put in a release date. I don't know why I added this bump afterwards. It doesn't display on screen. It just shows, because it only shows the year on the system anyway, so it just shows as 1996. You can manually edit whether it's 1, 2, 3 or 4 players, and you can manually put in the developer, and I think publisher is actually what displays on screen. It doesn't just show developer at the moment, it just shows publisher. So you can edit that category, this category, and the release date year if you want to. Description won't do anything. You might find, if you're adding custom games, just as I do, like I say, I've talked about adding Resident Evil 1.5. I think that will work, I just haven't got around to doing it yet. I've got it on a disc somewhere, the latest build. I will rip that myself. But when it came to Thrill Kill and Ridge Racer High Spec, as I mentioned, those games never got a commercial release, which means it won't pull the information in. When you add those titles, it will not track them properly, and it will not recognise them, and it will not try and add the game properly because it doesn't recognise the game by its ID. It won't have a product code, and it won't automatically download the artwork. You'll need to put all that information in manually, and then you'll need to manually add a screenshot into the respective folder. I have got a screenshot on here, it's just not showing on here right now. I've manually added that screenshot, and it will show up on the system when I go back to it shortly. So once you've done all that, add your games one at a time. You can't bulk add your games at the moment. You need to do them individually. So I can tell you now, it will take quite a while. Now I've got a 32GB card in there. With the inbuilt games, that takes the tally up quite a bit. Some of these games are tiny. If you want to, you can actually add ripped versions of the games. So if you know anything about PlayStation ISOs, some sites will allow you to download ripped versions. What they are is games with things like the FMV and certain soundtracks cut out, because those take up the majority of the space on a disc. And I believe the ripped version, like the standard version of Ridge Racer, is like 600 megabyte. The ripped version is about 3 megabyte. If you take out all the music and things like that. So if you want to save space, you can actually do that. I did it with the Tekken games on some of my early systems. I took out the FMV because it just takes up unnecessary space, and you end up with tiny ROM sizes. That's a good way of cramming more on if you're using a smaller thing. Me personally, I mean, you can see this is a 32 gigabyte drive. With the American versions, they tend to be slightly smaller disk images anyway, because they don't have all the languages on that the European versions do. When you've got language files and extra language soundtracks and things like that, it tends to bump up the file size a bit. That's another good reason to go with the American versions of the game for most of these. So that's what I've done, and by doing that, I think I've got something like 50 odd individual discs, which equates to about 47 individual games I've got on here. So when you add that to the 20 that are inbuilt into the system, that gives me 70 games. Now 70 games, I mean, I've got some top titles on here. They're not to everyone's taste, but you can see we've got the full Tekken series because Tekken 3 is already built into the system. I've added the Street Fighter Alpha games, 1, 2 and 3 are all on here. All of the Tomb Raider games, all of the Tony Hawk games, just because they're a personal favourite of mine. All of the Twisted Metal games, they're good multiplayer games. The Wipeout games, Worms, a brilliant multiplayer game. You know, Micro Machines, things like that. All the Spyro games, Soul Blade, Silent Hill, all of the Resident Evil games, because I absolutely love them. All of the Ridge Racers, we've got Mortal Kombat Trilogy, we've got Doom, you know, Discworld, you know, just adding a bit more variety. All the Crash Bandicoots, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which is a brilliant game. And it just adds up to, equates to being a great little lineup. So, anyway, once you've added all your games, as I've just demonstrated, you can then close this page up, which I'm going to do now. You can unplug it from your PC and you can then plug it into the wall. I'm going to leave it plugged into the PC just for the sake of showing you this, but we can now go to the TV and we can show you how all this operates. So I've got one controller plugged in at the moment. Oops, just trying to knock this over. 1 second while I readjust my cables, guys. All right. 2 seconds. There we go. So just the leg, that's better. And then when we go on to the actual system there, you can see we've got a choice between RetroArch and Bleem Sync. It's set up with my options, so it automatically boots into this. You just hit X on that, and you can see then it loads up the UI. Now it's added a new custom background away from the boring blue. I quite like this background, but I am on about changing this and making it look like the BIOS screen from the version 1 PlayStations, you know, the kind of grey grid, purely because that was the first PlayStation I owned. I had one of the very first models, and I like that style, so I'm probably going to switch to that at some point. And you can see on the wheel here, we've got, I'll just throw the sound up. Quite quiet. Battle Arena Edition, and I think that was on there by default, but then we've got the Buster Move games, Castlevania, Cool Borders was on there by default, but you can see it all flows perfectly well. It's all nice and uniform. It's, you know, you've got the mix between the classic games that were on there and the new games that I've added, and like I said, they all look nice because I've amended the disc cover arts to be a little bit more richer in colour. They all look a lot more uniform. It might not be quite as neat as this when you first do yours, but if you name them all correctly to a nice naming convention and you replace any of the crap downloaded artworks for slightly better quality ones, I think Ridge Racer was poor quality, so I've got a better quality one. Resident Evil 2 looked washed out, so I amended them in Photoshop, made them a bit darker. You get a much better finish. And then when it comes to launching them, it's exactly the same. Because you're using the standard GUI, you've still got the same options when it comes to using them. So save states and everything still work. If I go down there, you should see that we've got a memory card. I haven't got a memory card file for that one just yet, but we have got a save state saved at the bottom there. You can see the multi-disc games there. I've set them up. You can set them up so multi-disc games are you have to load one and then select the others, but I've not done that because with these games you didn't need to have one disc in to load the other. Like Resident Evil, I've got Leon disc and Claire disc selectable straight from the menu, because you don't want to put one in and then have to change the disc. It's a pain in the arse. So I've just done them both as two different discs on the menu. Road Rash, I think it's a brilliant game. Silent Hill, the original, is fantastic. Soul Blade is my personal favourite fighter on the PlayStation, and again that is the American version, so no censoring of the nunchucks and things like that for Li Long. And all the other games that I just mentioned anyway. There you go, you can see Thrill Kill with the custom artwork that I added on there, and that works perfectly fine. So everything's sorted, nice and neat. And of course you can add things like rare games, Tomba, Tombi, however you want to call it, Tomba 1 and 2, those are extremely rare for the PlayStation. It's hard to get hold of them games at all. And obviously with things like Thrill Kill never released, unless you've got a modified system. There was no real way to play those on a PlayStation, so this is pretty close, you know, and you've got them all in one place. So like I say, all in all, I think there's something like 72 games on here altogether, and that's plenty for me. That's all the games I really want to play, you know. So it would have been nice to have added the Final Fantasy games, but I'm out of room. One thing I do recommend when you fill your memory card, by the way, is that you always tend to leave a little bit of space. And when I say a little bit of space, on a 32GB card, I'd say try and leave a gigabyte free. The reason being, when it comes to things like hacks and EverDrives, I say this when people do EverDrives or anything, always try and leave at least one game space or 10%, whichever is the larger, because you don't know what kind of read-write cycles your system is doing when it's reading the games, or what hacks they're using to do it. And if you fill it to the brim, you might end up causing some kind of problem, which could cause problems with your console, or format your card, or ruin the file system or something. So, you know, although you want to try and cram on as much as possible, try and leave, on a 32GB card, leave half a gigabyte to 1 gigabyte of space. You know, don't be greedy with it. Obviously, the bigger the drives you've got, the less concern that is, but it's just a rule of thumb when you're using EverDrives or flash solutions, I find. And I'll just show you that one of these is working. We'll go back round to Soul Blade, just because it's a personal favourite of mine. I'll just show you that that's working. Okay. Just load that up. What's a shame is because I redid this hack a couple of times. Originally, I'd gone in and I'd opened up all the characters and I'd saved it all. When I did the hack, you will lose your saves, just so you know. If you select the replace emulator with RetroArch, you'll lose all your save games and everything. Well, they'll be there, but they won't load, they'll crash. So if you cherish your save games so far, then stick with the built-in emulator. If you don't, then just clear them out. You will get much better performance from this emulator. You can see the FMV on this is working just perfect. There's no stuttering, there's no slowdown on the FMV. I'll turn it up a bit. Intro on this game is still so fantastic. I think if there was one want I would actually want from this hack, it would be the addition of being able to put custom borders on. Not essential, but it looked very nice on the SNES and NES classics, where you were able to put like a theatre background or a Starfield background on the borders on the side, but not really essential, you know. If we start there, jump into the game, I'll just show you it should all be working sweet.
Welcome to the stage of history.
And like I say, it does run at pretty much full speed. You get the odd little jitter, but nothing serious. I attempt to play this without knocking my camera over.
Out of the ring.
Get out.
You win.
Love this game. Might give it a whirl actually. Gotcha.
The grueling battle ended with the victory.
And like I say, that runs, you know, pretty much perfectly. You know, there's no serious slowdown, no serious glitches. If you ever run this on an emulator, you might notice the odd slight lag between loading breaks. You get about the same on this, but the game performance is perfect. On the original version of this hack, the game performance did lag slightly. So with the modified RetroArch core, this is now running as good as it's going to be. It's perfectly playable and there's no serious slowdown. You might get the odd one frame skip here and there, but not that you're going to notice, do you know what I mean? The beauty of this as well, I'll just pause it there, because we're now using the RetroArch emulator, if I hit select and start together, we're able to go into this menu, and I've got the wrong background on it at the moment, I can change that for black. You can go into the RetroArch menu, and from here you can save more than one state, you know, because you can only save one state in the current menu. You can do as many save states as you want. You can reload your state on the fly. You can do rewind and fast forward. You can remap your controller. And one of the coolest things you can do is you've got your cheats menu. Now with the cheats menu, you can do cheat searching as though you would do with an action replay or on MAME or something like that. But if you've already got access to Game Shark codes, you can actually add in Game Shark codes. Now I did that to open up some of the things on these games originally. I still haven't found the right file locations to be able to copy memory card saves, because when I use emulators on PC, what you can actually do is download actual memory card dumps and copy the save files into your emulators. I think you can do that with RetroArch, but I can't find the right file locations on my USB drive to be able to do that and have it match up with the relevant game, if you know what I mean. You can download text files of Game Shark codes apparently and match those to games and have those auto load, but I still haven't quite spent long enough with it to do all that on this version yet. I will do that in time, but I just haven't done it as of yet. But like I say, you've got plenty of options from here to do all kinds of things with your game. If I go back to the options, I think you can change. If we go to options, there you go. You can manually select the frame skip. You can manually select the region. You can activate second memory card. You can change the pad type. It's worth mentioning that with this hack, obviously, with the original hack, you needed to put some modified code in to be able to use 2 pads, or to be able to use like analog stick pads and things like that. With this hack now, I think support for other joypads is built in. So if you've got a USB joypad that's got analog sticks, in theory you should be able to use those, and you can set up the analog controls to respond to them the way you want. Obviously you can't use things like light guns and things like that. That just won't work. The technology doesn't match. But as far as like USB pads go, it does open that up. So if you want to have analog control in certain games, that will work. I don't know if things like force feedback works. So if you were to say use a DualShock with a USB adapter maybe, I don't think you'll be able to enable like rumble or anything like that, but I'm not sure. I haven't gone into it deep enough. Now, one thing I mentioned there was multiplayer. Now, probably a few of you are probably wondering what I'm doing talking about multiplayer, because you can see one inherent restriction with this, and that is that we've got only one pad plugged in, and we're sacrificing the second person because the USB drive needs to be plugged in there. Well, there is again a way around this. Now, I've experimented with a few different types, and I'm going to quit out of the game here just so I can show you this. So let's cancel out of this, press select and start, there we go, and then we just hit the reset button, and then we can press power to close that down. There we go. Now I'm going to unplug it just from my PC for a second. I'll plug it back in a minute. But yeah, you'll notice obviously there's no way to play 2-player here. Now, because of the 100 milliamp limit, that also can restrict the ability to use like a lot of USB hubs unless they're externally powered. Well, again, that's a pain in the arse. You can support 2-player this way, and using the latest build of RetroArch, I believe it will support up to 4 players. Now, I think you would need a powered USB hub for 4 players. But I actually hunted around and I tried several different types. So I tried a couple of types off eBay, which were just simple splitter cables, but they didn't work. So I hunted around and I found this one in the end. I tried a few and returned them because they were a piece of crap. And luckily I found this one. Now this one you can get on eBay for about, I think it was £3.50 for this, £4. It's very basic. It's in white, so it's similarly close, coloured to the PlayStation, I suppose. There's black versions available as well. And quite simply, you take your USB hub. You can see I've already got Player 2's controller plugged into that. I've unplugged the PlayStation Mini for now, just while I change this over. And just give me 2 seconds. I'll plug that one into the front. There's probably, I was looking for the most compact USB hub I could that was unpowered, and you'll notice on the actual USB hub it does say it's a USB 2.0 hub. If you're using a USB 3 one, or one that's got a lot of LEDs and stuff on, you'll probably find that it will exceed the limit. Now, the way I've seen this advised to do online is to have player 1 joypad in the first socket, and then in the second socket use the USB hub with the USB drive and second player controller. I would advise the opposite. The current draw on one of these controllers is extremely low, so it makes much more sense to plug both of the controllers into the USB hub and plug that into controller port 1, and then use the second port exclusively for the USB flash drive that you're using with all your games on. And now if we plug this back in, give that a second to deliver power back through. It always takes a slight delay with getting the power through from a PC. And we'll fire it up. Heard my PC there connecting to it. And you can see I've got it skipping the intro sequence. It should focus in just a second. There you go. And if I now go back to BleemSync, let it load up, you can see it's loading fine. If you're using a hub that doesn't work or doesn't have, or is pulling too much current, you'll find that sometimes it won't even load at all, so you'll know if you're on the wrong track. Like I say, you might need to experiment a little bit with finding the right memory card to use, but definitely persevere and definitely try and follow my advice on here. My advice would be to probably get no more, if you want to use it with the minimal attachments, get yourself a 32 gigabyte SDHC card, because obviously if you go up from that it becomes SDXC, which draws more current, and a basic USB to SD card adapter, and do it the way I've done it. If you want a massive collection, you're going to need a powered USB hard drive or a powered hub with a USB 3 flash drive, and that's not very convenient at all. And then of course when it comes to having dual controllers hooked up, get yourself a nice compact hub like this. I am going to test this at some point with extra USB controllers to see just what it can handle, but for now at the very least it's set up for 2-player. I'm doing this with player 1's controller right now because you need player 1's controller to move the menu. But if I go into a 2-player game, in fact I'll go to Tekken this time, wherever it was. Here we go, we're going to Tekken 2, my personal favourite of the early Tekken games. Tekken 3, don't get me wrong, had a lot more characters, a lot more combo potential, looked a lot nicer, but Tekken 2 was something we used to have sessions on back in the day. And if I go, you'll see that versus mode is open. if player 2's controller wasn't plugged in, versus mode is blanked out. So we go to that, player 1, and I'm just using player 2's controllers in front of me there. You can see that's all working fine. And you can have 2 players with a USB drive plugged in. And again, this is Tekken 2 here. You can see that it already runs smoother than the built-in Tekken 3 because it's the American version, and it's using the new emulator, so it performs a lot better than the built-in. Yeah, performs a lot better than the built-in PCSX emulator anyway. So yeah, so there we go. Pop out of that, go back to the menu where it's quieter. And you'll see in a second it should pop up. There you go, it's created a restore point for that. And once you start saving restore points with this version of the emulator, you can then use them and reload them from the menu system. There was a slight delay there because it was the first time it created a restore point. But the game saves and the save states will all work with this mod once you set it up from the initial. So there it is, the PlayStation Classic Mini with all the mods you need. If you're going to do it, and you're going to do it for multiplayer and to set it up as a usable console, this hack I think is essential. Do it with the minimal amount of plugins like I've done here. You might be able to find a USB 2.0 USB hub that works perfectly and is a bit more compact than this. If you do, please let me know. This is the one I recommend. If you look on eBay, it's quite recognisable on eBay, and like I say, I think this cost me about £4. After trying a couple that just didn't work at all, I found out they're actually faulty cables, and a couple that I had lying around here that were older and were just poorly built anyway. I found this one works without being externally powered. You can't externally power it anyway. This one works perfectly fine with 2 players going at it. This little SD card adapter from mymemory.co.uk with a 32GB card works perfectly for me. And with this, like I say, I've got a 70 odd game set up, running in multiplayer, and pretty soon I'll be testing it with 3 and 4 player to see how that goes. But now the games run at a nice speed, they run pretty well. I mean, I could go through and show you what the performance is like with certain other games. I'll quickly jump on Ridge Racer just to finish this off well and show you what that lag kind of looks like. It's not massive on these games now. It's certainly decreased from what it was on the with the built-in emulator, but it's still not quite perfect, if you know what I mean. You can see that this is running a little bit faster than it should be. Oh, I didn't quite get it. I can usually get that every time. If I go into the game, I'll stick with the standard car because I'm used to it. And if you actually play this back and check the timer against a real watch, you'll see the time difference. So even though it's not that noticeable in the actual gameplay, you'll notice once I cross the start line, you'll notice the actual lap timer is running slightly slower than in the top right hand corner there. It's running slightly slower than it is in real time, and that shouldn't be the case. It should be matching in real time. And you'll notice it most when I go to areas with much more in the draw distance, like here. You've got an animated waterfall, you've got the mountains and that. You'll notice the timer's running slightly slower than normal because the game's not running at full speed. It only runs at 24 frames a second. I think it runs at anyway, the original game, but still there's a definite lag here and there which can throw your timing off a little bit. I might notice it as I go in this corner as well. Handled it okay, but with the helicopter that comes down here, there's usually a little bit of lag there. Like I say, play this back and compare it with a stopwatch. That's probably where you'll notice it the most. I can certainly feel it in the odd spot on here, but it's not enough to actually destroy the game for me. But like I say, the Ridge Racer high spec demo didn't work at all. There's no slowdown in the music, but there's definitely a slight slowdown on the gameplay. Playable but not perfect, but most other games you're not going to notice a massive difference. Racing games you might do, but most fighters are pretty much stable. If they do drop a frame here or there, it won't actually slow down the gameplay. It will just drop the frame. On here, it actually slows down the game slightly. I don't know whether that's to do with the fact that more of the backgrounds are drawn on the fly or what, but yeah, Ridge Racer suffers slightly, unfortunately. So I'm kind of glad I've got my PSIO coming very soon. I mean, as far as being able to play the games go, you can see here, I mean, this is a quick blast, and I'm in second place, so it hasn't affected my game that much. I might even win it if I'm lucky. I've got to play it to the end now. You want to see how I do, don't you? Man, I do miss my sit-down Ridge Racer, but at least it's got a good home at Arcade Club. Come on, please don't get overtaken. Please don't get overtaken. Please give me first place. Yeah, there we go. There we go. So, yeah. So that is the PlayStation Mini hack. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. I know it's gone on a lot longer than I intended it to, but at the end of the day, I'm trying to fully clue you up as to all the ins and outs of what you're looking at. If you go back over and watch this in detail, you know the kind of things to watch out for. But I've given you all the links that you need. I've given you all the advice I can give you on this. And I've given you my thoughts as to giving you the best setup you possibly can. I'm happy with the way I've got this now. Like I say, this isn't mine, but hopefully I've got one coming soon, and I've got I'll be able to modify that one up to look just like this one, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'm happy with this setup, and hopefully a few of you will be able to do the same with yours and get the most out of your PlayStation Classic Mini. If you haven't got one yet, I got it when it had had a price slash done. I picked this one up for 50 quid. They started out 100 quid. I believe they've now been cut as low as 30 quid in places. So, you know, it's worth picking up if you want an accessible way to get back into PlayStation. Grab one, do the mod, and you've got yourself a good PlayStation library you can plug into your HD TV. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Next coming up, now I've finally had some parts arrived. You can see over there, just hiding in the background, is the Famicom Twin. We'll be doing a video on that, and I'll be showing you how that differs from the standard Famicom and how awesome it is to be able to play NES games in a new way. But for now, take it easy, guys. I'll speak to you soon.